Right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our talk from Andrew Durham for 2025 Asian Hornet Week. Andrew's a really good speaker on this subject. He's so knowledgeable. He's got a really good book out about Asian Hornet, should you want to read more about it. And we really value the time he takes to do all the research. And he's been researching this for quite a long time now. I think it's 11 years, isn't it, Andrew?
Yep, that'll be
So
right.
it is over to you, Andrew. Thank you so much. We will take questions at the end. If you all put them in the chat, we will sift through them later.
Let's make sure we're sharing the right screen. So you should be looking at a full screen, except for me in the corner. Just saying that this is a images are subject to copyright. The briefing is a non-commercial educational service for members of the British Beekeeping Association. And the views expressed in this presentation do not purport to represent those of the BBKA. We're going to go straight to a European capital, and this is Brussels. In Belgium, the battle was lost before it had barely begun. The Asian Hornet continues to spread at an alarming rate, and it is forcing changes in policy that are going to impact on us in the UK. That nest was in Josephat Park in Brussels. Professor Louis Monega is a part of Group F. It's a beekeeper nest destruction team, one of a number of teams under Group F, fighting the proliferation of hornets. So he says, so within 500 meters, we had 5 active nests, which we neutralized. All this is to tell you that the nest density is there. Nest numbers in Brussels have been quadrupling year on year. There are confirmed reports that some of the city's municipalities were reporting at least 5 nests per square kilometre 2 years ago, and one, Walouvre, if I've pronounced it correctly, Saint-Pierre, destroyed 116 nests, which equated to 13 nests per square kilometre. But as I say, that was 2 years ago. The city's fire brigade intervened only 7 times in 2022, but in 2023, it was called out 776 times. That does not mean they had a 700-fold increase in nests. Some of that was duplication until the fire brigade learnt to mark the nests that had been reported. And part of it was down to a sudden awareness by the part of the general population. But by then it was too late, and it prompted a change in policy. Unless a nest is a direct threat to the public, they won't intervene. You'll have to have it destroyed by a pest controller at your own expense. Now, the director of the Brussels Nature Development Department explained that based on French data, all of these trapping and tracking mechanisms have a negligible effect compared to the hornet's population dynamics. Well, is he correct? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Ad hoc groups of beekeepers, alongside concerned citizens and working with municipalities, have sprung up across Belgium to try and fill the gap left by the government's devolvement of nest destruction to the local authorities. CARI, the Belgian Scientific Bee Information Group, criticised the Brussels authorities, saying that there's been no awareness. We're left with denial. The hornet is perceived as a purely beekeeping problem. In the end, the beekeepers have had to manage on their own. Now, an uncontrolled expansion and increasing nest numbers in Belgium can only mean more Asian hornet foundress queens arriving in the UK. But for now, we are in the eradication phase. The hornet is here, but it has yet to get established. Our MBU has done a magnificent job buying us time in which we should think about the beekeeper's role in the fight against the Asian hornet. I'm talking primarily of the situation in which the government ceases its attempts to eradicate the hornet because it has become established beyond the point at which it can be eradicated, and then withdraws the MBU. What then is the beekeeper's role? It's a question we must consider because in Belgium, France, and now Switzerland, beekeepers are increasingly being drawn into the frontline fight against the yellow-legged hornet. But are they actually doing anything that will affect the outcome? Can they destroy enough nests to make a difference? Or is nest destruction a dangerous delusion that makes us think it can achieve something that it cannot? And if nest destruction turns out to be a delusion, then can beekeeper nest destruction teams work in support of beekeepers? Well, we'll go back to Belgium for that one, because that's exactly what they've done in the region of Wallonia. The spring trapping of foundress queens, before they could get started, had always been dismissed by the scientists as ineffective and inefficient. But in France, they've changed their minds. Why was that? You may be surprised at the answer. Can it be better than not trapping? In fact, as nest destruction becomes limited, can spring trapping take its place? And in an effort to protect biodiversity, meaning the general insect population, are we being pushed into using traps that are too expensive, too selective, and not fit for purpose? I'm going to start in France, where I've been getting up to date, having taken time out to write the book that Diane was telling you about. The month of May saw me back in France. This time I was just outside the village of Saint-Emilion. You see me here with my back to the camera. I was chatting to Thomas, the beekeeper at Chateau Funrock, with some assistance from a very helpful Chloe in the foreground. Incidentally, you'll see that little blue map popping up occasionally, just to orientate you on where we are in France. Saint-Emilion is in the department of the Gironde. It's a French department, being the equivalent of one of our counties. And as you can see from the graphic, it lies in the southwest region of Nouvelle-Aquitaine, where the hornet first arrived over 20 years ago now. Let's look at how the hornet affects beekeepers in that region. There was a survey published earlier this year that involved 1,400 of them. 20 years on then from the arrival of the hornet, almost 3/4 of beekeepers in the region reported predation by the yellow-legged hornet in their apiaries. But of course, the reverse of that is that 1/4 did not. 29% of respondents, so getting on for a third, experienced strong predation, defined as more than 3 hornets to be found in front of the hive during the day in the predation period. This underlines how variable the hornet's presence can be across an area, even 20 years after its arrival. Beekeepers put losses attributed to the hornet in the winter of 2023 at almost 1/3 of their total winter losses. Autumn losses in 2024 were put at an additional 6%. We'll be coming back to this survey from time to time. Prior to the introduction of the new French National Strategy and Plan, introduced in France in 2023, nest destruction can best be described as disorganized or even non-existent, ranging from ad hoc destruction by beekeepers, beekeepers with guns, individuals, gun clubs. They seem to have a thing about shooting Asian hornet nests. The fire brigade got involved and in fact were very effective and very good, although in the latter part they started using paintball guns, and that caused a bit of a problem, because if you miss, you litter the countryside with paintballs full of insecticide. And then in came the pest controllers. And the pest controllers came in with their paintball guns, but they also came in with incredibly expensive drones that could inject poison into the nests. And actually seeing that pest controller with his drone, I heard an account of the destruction of the first yellow-legged hornet nest in Georgia, USA. And this was an account from the Georgia State beekeeper, bee inspector, I should say. They located the nest very high up in a tree. A drone such as the one you see here was deployed, but every time the drone closed in on the nest, it would back off. Time and again, the operator tried to make it attack the nest. It took a while for them to realize that the drone had a safety feature that made it avoid foliage. They called in a tree surgeon to climb up and destroy the nest, but by this time news had leaked out and they were getting calls from scientific institutions to make sure they preserved the nest intact for study. The tree surgeon turned to the bee inspector and asked what he should do. The bee inspector replied in that wonderful southern states drawl, "I don't care, I want it dead." There's a man who's clear about his objectives, and we need to be clear about ours. Nest destruction schemes range from that organised by local communes to the department-wide and very well organised schemes that I have described in previous talks. In recent years, faced with sudden surges in nest numbers, many of these publicly subsidised departmental schemes were finding them too costly, and the government was under pressure to do something. The new French National Plan, launched after the huge surge in 2022, aims to get a standardised fight in operation in every department in the country. The third objective on that list on the front page is particularly interesting to me because the French government had always maintained there was no risk to the general population. This is the organisation tree for the plan, and the first question I would ask is, how did beekeepers end up with such a leading role? Are beekeepers responsible for the protection of the public? Or for that matter, for biodiversity in general? Or are they just seen as a likely pool of volunteers because of the threat to their bees? The plan relies on local funding at regional and department level because there's very little state funding, and the scheme is almost entirely dependent on volunteers. In the absence of sufficient money to pay scheme managers, the plan will be implemented by the department bee health associations with their volunteer members, who are usually beekeepers. The plan is for nest destruction to be done by pest controllers, but the plan says the private property owner will have to pay. Now, some French departments, Ille-et-Vilaine in Brittany, for example, and some communes such as Chambord in the Val d'Oise, have seen the risk that without publicly funded support for nest destruction on private property, these schemes will collapse. And so they've decided to ignore the plan and to subsidise the destruction costs for nests on private property. They are effectively carrying on as before. Such is the power of the public. The new French plan is radically different about the way it approaches control of the hornet. The controls are determined by the hornet's presence in an area, measured by the number of hornets in front of the hive during the predation window and obviously during the day. So weak is 1 hornet in front of a hive, medium is 1 to 3, strong is over 3. Now, destruction of nests starts to be phased out very early on. Once there's more than 1 hornet predating in front of a hive, more than 3 hornets and nest destruction is reserved for instances where there is a direct threat to the public, or for nests in the vicinity of apiaries. And I guess that's a recognition or perhaps negotiation for all the work the plan puts on beekeepers. Spring trapping of foundress queens only starts when the hornet's presence reaches the medium level threshold of 1 to 3 hornets in front of a hive. Now, because predation levels vary so widely across an area and nest numbers fluctuate greatly year on year, I have to say I don't believe this plan is manageable. And spring trapping can't be tied to predation levels in this way. For a start, spring trapping has to happen before predation levels are known. As soon as you start to generalize on the levels of predation across the department or base actions on the previous year, the logic for this plan goes completely out of the window. And furthermore, you can't just switch from nest destruction to spring trapping and turning it on and off like a tap. It doesn't work. This new plan, I have to say, has lost touch with reality. Well, what does that mean for us? Well, more nests in western and northern France, if this plan doesn't work, means more foundress queens in the UK. because they're getting to us from northern France and Belgium. There are those that argue that nest destruction is the only way to deal with the Asian hornet. It sounds good in theory, but can you destroy enough nests to make a difference? And do you know where the nests are in order to destroy them? And when I talk about nest destruction, I mean the whole process from start to finish. It's not just a case of picking up the phone and calling a pest controller. Somebody's got to report the nest. It's got to be identified and located. It's got to be destroyed. And then afterwards, there has to be a confirmation that the nest is destroyed in accordance with protocols, if any public money is involved. And of course, it ends up with payment for the nest destruction. It's an integrated process when it works well. So it's time consuming, and it involves a number of bodies and a number of people. And when you think of nest destruction, don't think of a nest. Think thousands of nests to be destroyed between July and November in a typical department. From now on, let's call it nests with a very big S at the end of nest. All nest destruction schemes face the same difficulties. The nests may be very high in the trees, difficult to destroy without specialist equipment, difficult to spot. And in case you're wondering, it's there. Destruction using firearms, water cannons, arrows, or other methods that could encourage the dispersal of individuals and relocation of the nest, as well as the pest controller's paintball gun, are prohibited under the new plan or charter. The Belgian government maintains that nests that are over 5 meters up, not a problem to humans, so people would just have to live with them. That is a recipe for uncontrolled expansion. Even lower down, the nests are not easy to spot whilst the trees have their leaves on. Now, there are ways to find these hidden nests: radio telemetry, acoustic signature, thermal imaging, all offer faster location of nests. Whilst these can play a very useful role in the pre-establishment or eradication phase, such as we're in now, once the hornet is established, it's not the time taken to find the nests that is the only issue. It's the time taken to get location teams to site and into action versus the scale of the task and its cost. The end result is that many nests are not detected until the autumn. A lot of the damage to biodiversity has already been done, and destruction doesn't come in time to stop predation in apiaries. Sexuals leave the nest in the latter part of September. So as you can see here, too many nests are destroyed too late. The French recognize that they are not destroying enough nests early enough to affect the hornet's population. And this is what is driving policy in France and Belgium. Now, this is the famous Rumsfeld matrix, well, a shortened version of it anyway. We know how many nests are reported. We don't know how many nests are unreported. It's a bit like looking for black holes in space. You can't see them, so you may have to look at other things to get an idea of how big the problem is, and that's what I'm going to try and do tonight. It's difficult to identify all the factors that influence nest reports in an area. They are, as Donald Rumsfeld called them, the unknown unknown. But it is the nests that are not reported that is the biggest challenge, because if you have nests that are not destroyed, they simply repopulate an area. Such is the reproductive capacity of the Asian hornet. Now, I want to show you a sequence of slides showing where Asian hornet nests were reported in 3 French departments. This is where the population is concentrated in the department of Calvados, the D-Day department, broken down into the communes or municipalities. The city of Caen in the centre with its satellite communities, the towns of Lisieux in the east, Bayeux in the west. And in fact, you can also make out Falaise to the way to the south of Caen. Then there are the villages and towns along the D-Day beaches. The rest of the department in that very light grey is rural and very sparsely populated. And it is there that we have the biggest problem with unreported nests. By the way, you'll notice that in the southeast and the southwest, there are communes that are all grouped together into larger administrative units. That will distort the reporting picture on the following maps to some extent, because the towns in them will skew the colours. This is where the nests were reported in 2017, which was the first full year of Calvados's scheme's operation. The communes signed up to the scheme is top right. The green shows where the communes have signed up, the red where they haven't or have refused, and the white where there's still a decision to be made. Most of the communes then signed up. Far fewer nests are reported once you are away from those centres of population. And note that the darkest blue is covering a much wider range of nests than the lighter blues even put together. The white areas on the map represent no nests reported at all, even though we know that there were hornets in those areas in 2017. That's why the plan started. In the hornet surge year of 2018, far more nests were reported, and this exposed the lack of reporting the year before, but still the vast majority of nests are reported in and around those population centres. If I take you over to the neighbouring department of Manche, focus on Cherbourg in the north with its ferry port, Saint-Lô in the east, we have Coutances in the west, Avranches in the south, with the popular seaside areas between the two. Note how much of the peninsula is coloured yellow, very sparsely populated. As with Calvados, the very dark blue is representing far more nests than all the lighter blues. The correlation of reported nests with population density is clear. In fact, if you can't quite see it, you might see it better if I put it in grayscale for you. By the way, this was the 2018 surge year. In the nest numbers in 2022, only 4 years later, we're talking 10,000 reported nests. So in 4 years, that had doubled in a surge year. Ille-et-Vilaine in Brittany. Well, perhaps we should ask a different question, not just the difference between urban and rural, but why is there a big difference between the number of nests reported in adjacent rural communes of the same population density when there is no discernible difference between them? Looking at them over the on the satellite mapping, we can see absolutely nothing to distinguish one from another, even allowing for the different size of the communes. This is one of the unknown unknowns, but you cannot rely on nest reports to represent the actual nest situation. Now, this year, Ille-et-Vilaine had already exceeded the total for last year's nest figures by the end of July alone. And in fact, in July, 2,153 interventions in the month of July. It's unprecedented. Predation in April started early. It's going to be a very rough year for beekeepers that are not prepared in Brittany and Normandy. And I'm getting reports that this is a countrywide problem this year. Where we have nest destruction schemes, we should look at them more closely. They fall into one of three categories. Reported nest destruction. This is where they only deal with nests after they have been reported. This is by far the most common scheme where a department scheme is in operation. Some schemes incorporate wide area spring trapping and reported nest destruction. Very few schemes indeed operate track and trace, so we're going to have to go to Jersey for that one. But looking at the simplest scheme, which is reported nest destruction, this is the reports for the Department of Manche, the westernmost department of Normandy. Remember, 2017 saw the first full year of operation for that department. Here are the reports for the initial years, followed by the ones bringing you up to date. Well, of course, 2025, we don't know the result, but it's looking like a surge there as well. Looking at a red trend line, and it is representative of other reported nest destruction schemes, can we say that such schemes work to control the Asian hornet? Well, sadly, the answer is obviously no. It's a relentless upwards trend, and at best, nest destruction is going to serve as a mitigation. What about the resources you require, even for a reported nest destruction scheme? Well, most communes or parish councils sign up to schemes, and there's a good reason for doing so. Yeah, it's like a collective insurance policy that meets the costs of nest destruction if you, as a private citizen, are unfortunate enough to have a nest on your property. Pest controllers signed up to an agreed tariff, but I noticed something in the new French plan. In the small print, pest controllers will be required to pay to belong to the scheme. So now they want a cheap tariff and a contribution to running the scheme. Furthermore, because the charter in the new plan prohibits the use of paint guns, that's going to make the destruction of nests that are very high up much more expensive. But getting those vital local referents, the people who check the nests and manage the scheme at commune or parish level, was a struggle. Just switching to Calvados for a moment, in 2021, all those white areas are communes that did not have a reference, so there was nobody there running the scheme, or people had to double cover. It's a very important role indeed, but they ask a lot of these referents, and I'm afraid the scientists on the steering committee of the new national plan really haven't helped with this. They have used their position to introduce a secondary objective into the new French plan and turn the whole thing into a data collection exercise with lots of form filling and data entry. It is disaffecting volunteers. At this time, Calvados was destroying around 3,000 nests a year. Now you know why I asked you to look up what the area of your county was, so you can get an idea of how many nests you might see here if the Asian Hornet gets established. Monch, well, let's say 3,000 nests a year. Monch was a bit more, but the numbers went up after the 2022 surge. And don't overlook the additional cost of a reporting system, a scheme manager to handle reporting, authorize payments, carry out audits, etc. It's a challenging and time-consuming role. These schemes are expensive and had to be heavily subsidized. So I suggested earlier on that you looked up the area of your county, and that was so you can compare the size. By the way, Monch had more nests than Calvados because at that time it was in a slightly different and more favourable climatic zone. I'm not sure that difference exists anymore. So for a reported nest scheme, the simplest scheme, those running the scheme would have to plan on being able to deal with between 0.5 to 1 nest per square kilometre of their total area. So remember, we are looking at the situation where the Hornet is established. So Oxfordshire should be able, if it was running a scheme, of dealing between 1,300 to 2,600 reported nests if they operate just a simple reported nest scheme. But remember, these are baseline figures. They don't reflect the actual number of nests, which is far greater. Wide area spring trapping and nest destruction. Well, some schemes involve organised wide area spring trapping because that offers the opportunity to kill foundress queens at the primary nest stage, and that is much better for biodiversity and for beekeeping. This is the scheme in the Department of Morbihan in Brittany, got going in 2015, and it incorporated a very well organised wide area spring trapping campaign. And by the way, Devon is about the same size as Morbihan. Notice the quadrupling in the first few years before the scheme got going. These are the reported nest figures at the end of the year. The wide fluctuations are all attributed to the weather in the year, and you can clearly see the surge years when nest numbers suddenly shot up. If we could put a trend line across, it would be much flatter, possibly even negative. But to what extent was that down to spring trapping? Now, these are the figures in more detail. There's too much on that screen to take in. We'll ignore the reports after 2017 because the scheme managers reported that they had so much difficulty getting the trappers to submit trap analysis reports, and so they were under-reporting the queens caught in spring. after 2017. And we'll focus just on the years after the scheme started. The key question is, how many more reported nests would there have been had those queens not been caught? Well, scientists tell us that only 1 in 9 emergent foundress queens founds a main nest. Now, I have no idea how they got to that, but we'll not argue about it. For ease of the maths, I've used 1 in 10. At that ratio, there would have been an additional 2,500 nests in 2015 to add to the 3,500 reported nests. 2016 was a surge year, and so that figure of an additional 5,000 nests to add to the 5,000 reported nests is very conservative. 2017, they actually caught 68,000 queens. That would have been an additional 7,000 nests to add to the 3,700 secondary and primary nests that were reported. Why only 3,700? Because they caught all those queens in the spring. If I represent this in a different way, these are the reported nest figures for 3 adjacent departments of Finistère, Morbihan and Ille-et-Vilaine, all in Brittany, all of a comparable area. The hornet arrived in Finistère, represented by the red line, just a little later than the other two, but their reported figures soon exceed those of the other 2 departments. Why? Because Finistère was not operating a wide area spring trapping campaign, so they didn't have this culling of foundress queens early on in the process. Ille-et-Vilaine and Morbihan kind of matched each other. But then Ille-et-Vilaine started to abandon spring trapping. It was too difficult to control, because spring trapping deals with a large number of foundress queens that survive hibernation in the mild winter that usually precedes a surge year. The difference is very noticeable in the surge years, and in the years that follow, the difference is more obvious. The reported nest figures for Morbihan are much lower. But the problem with wide area spring trapping is that it's not controllable, and too much non-selective trapping takes place, and still far too many nests are not being found. The only way to improve on this is to get the nests earlier, and that means to go out and find them. For this, you need a dedicated team of trackers and many more volunteers to monitor bait stations. The island of Jersey carries out track and trace. It's led and funded by the island's government. They have recruited 40 trackers, and about 200 people are monitoring bait stations. This is the Jersey nest location map for 2022. And the first thing to notice is that nests are not just concentrated in urban and suburban areas. That concentration of nests on the east of the island on the right-hand side, closest to Monch, is in a rural area. It looks a bit to me like the situation in Kent, suggesting that they're being reinvaded every year from nearby Monch. When I first saw these maps from Jersey, I knew the contention that the hornet is an urban dweller was flawed, and that there were many more nests in the countryside than were ever reported in France. In 2023, Jersey found 330 nests. There's no obvious reason why Jersey should have more nests than the Department of Monch, only 17 miles away. And if I scale that Jersey figure up to the area of Monch, Monch should have reported 16,000 nests, but they actually reported 8,000, just under half. It just highlights how many nests are not reported in that most common scheme, the reported nest scheme. So why don't we all do track and trace? Well, Jersey has a population of 104,000 people. That's a lot of people on an island of only 120 square kilometres or 75 square miles. And I'm now overlaying a population density map that shows each of the 12 Jersey parishes. The numbers in black are the population density per square kilometre in each of those parishes. So Trinity, which is at roughly 1 o'clock to St Helier, 272 people per square kilometre across that parish, and that means a lot of eyes on the ground. Take that across to Normandy and look at the population density here again. Trinity, the least populated of the Jersey parishes, with 270 people per square kilometre, sits right in the middle of that scale. Everywhere else, all the yellow and the light brown, far fewer people. There is absolutely no hope of scaling a Jersey operation in the French departments. They don't have the population from which to get volunteers, and they have a much bigger area to cover. And the same applies to our rural counties, where some parishes are just as underpopulated. There's Norfolk, there's the arrow sitting in the middle of the scale. Look how much of Norfolk is showing up as white. Furthermore, if reported nest schemes are less than 50% efficient, then we're going to have to increase our planning figure to arrive at the potential scale of the problem that a track and trace could have to deal with. And even if you have the pest controllers on board, the scheme would still have to handle the reporting and referent roles. So we're now on between 2 and 3 nests per square kilometre. Between July and November, because that's when the nests have to be destroyed, Essex, 3,670 square kilometres, well, they would have to be dealing with 7,000 to 11,000 nests. If I summarise nest destruction, schemes that deal only with reported nests are the least efficient, and destruction is often too late to protect either biodiversity or beekeeping. Wide area spring trapping sees a greater reduction in nests and is better for bees and biodiversity, but you now need to add in an army of trappers and it's difficult to control. Well-organised wide area trapping followed by track and trace is the most efficient and has to be the best for biodiversity and beekeeping. However, for the UK mainland, it's not viable once the hornet gets established. The size of the task and the resource required is too great. The overriding problem with all these schemes is that they are mitigating the problem, but not actually solving it, and nest numbers continue to rise. The scheme managers for nest destruction in Ile-et-Vilaine in Brittany, which had been running the scheme for 10 years, have this to say: the destruction of detected nests is not a perfect solution, since it does not impact the number of nests in the following year. However, it reduces the pressure of the hornet on our environment and it limits the risk of stings. If the nests were no longer destroyed, our environment would be saturated with Asian hornets from September to mid-November, with all the impacts that we know. But just how many nests do you have to destroy to make a difference? Well, the French National Institute of Agricultural Research, INRA, and the the National Centre for Scientific Research, the CNRS, they said, and this was calculated really quite early on in the invasion, destroying 60% of nests would equal a 17% reduction in spread, but only a 29% reduction in nest density. If you could destroy 95% of nests, you'd get a 43% reduction in spread and a 53% reduction in density. I always find it slightly difficult to get my head around that. The French National Museum of Natural History, which is the government's chief advisor on the hornet, summed up the situation on nest destruction, and this was what was quoted in a report to the French National Assembly earlier this year. Wiping out 50% of the Asian hornet population in 7 years would require destroying 95% of its nests each year before the production of sexuals. Given that 95% is an impossibly high target, what those beekeepers on the continent are doing is not the best thing they can do to help their bees. So here in one slide is the situation for beekeepers. At the heart of defense against the hornet lies good beekeeping. Strong, healthy colonies survive the hornet much better than weak or sick colonies, and no one else will look after your bees for you. Beekeepers can put a ring of defences in the apiary that can be very effective indeed, but you must learn how and when to use them. This is where beekeeping associations, in my opinion, should put their effort. If the beekeeper takes the fight out into the vicinity of the apiary, say to within 1 kilometre, or even just 600 metres would make a profound difference, they can do two very useful things to help their bees. Firstly, they can put out traps and trap the foundress queens in the spring before they make the nest that will predate their bees that season. Get rid of them before they even start. Secondly, they can locate the main or secondary nests that are predating their bees and get them destroyed by an authorized pest controller or a trained beekeeper nest destruction team, which is what's happened somewhere on the continent, Wallonia, for example. If you do these things, you have done what you can for your bees. Anything else is mitigation in aid of the general population. And as we've seen, it has a limited effect on biodiversity. Now, I want to just deal with beekeeper nest destruction teams very briefly. Let's look at this from the Belgian idea of beekeepers setting up their own nest destruction schemes, which is what they've done in Wallonia to help beekeepers who have a problem. I think I mentioned this last year. They set up a scheme whereby a beekeeper can request a beekeeper team to destroy a nest within 1 kilometre of their apiary. Well, they started off with 18 teams, but they very rapidly had to form more. Some of these are working with the support of local municipalities. And in Wallonia, you have to know where the nest is and get the landowner's permission for destruction before asking for help. But it's worth noting that 70% of the new Aquitaine beekeepers did not know where the hornets in their apiary were coming from. So if you set up a scheme like this and get a call for help, are you going to commit to track and trace to help that beekeeper? Well, that might be an option if beekeeping associations bought their own radio trackers, but it could be a much bigger job than you might imagine. In my county, there are 500 beekeepers. Times that by 3 to get the area in square kilometres that you would be covering, because that is the radius, that is the area of a circle with a 1 kilometre radius. That's 1,500 square kilometres. That is half the area of our county. This is an area covered in Belgium by one team. It's actually 900 square kilometres. You could try and conserve your resources by limiting your interventions. You could only do it, for example, when predation in the apiary is at a strong level on the French scale, because even the simpler apiary defences can cope with low to medium predation. You could only do it on confirmation that the beekeeper requesting help had actually deployed defences. After all, why should beekeepers race around to help a beekeeper that's not helped themselves? But I'm not sure I'd want to have to make that decision. The thing is, it still involves cost. Costs in setting it up, training people, getting them certificated to use the pesticides, not to mention operating costs, travel costs, the actual chemicals used. If you added it all up and factored in the time involved, you might actually be better off setting up a scheme whereby an association subsidised destruction by a pest controller, a sort of beekeeper mutual insurance scheme. The key message here is don't rush into beekeeper nest destruction. If beekeepers are doing what they should be doing in their apiary, it shouldn't be needed anyway for some time after the hornet is established. By then, local authorities may well have started their own schemes. Now I want to deal with something completely different. Spring trapping in the vicinity of the apiary. Is it the lesser evil? This is what that Ile-et-Vilaine scheme managers said. One form of trapping must be maintained and developed. Mass trapping carried out with specific traps around hives by beekeepers alone, allowing pressure to be reduced on the hive. Everybody's agreed in France, and the national beekeeper associations are all fully behind the idea of beekeeper spring trapping because it has been proved to be very effective. But there was a problem with this. When the hornet first arrived and started stinging people, citizens got together to make traps to catch the hornet. People met in barns and village halls to make traps. There were workshops on how to make traps. Even school children were making traps in the classroom. One French prefect, that's the state's representative in a department, called it hysteria. These are all non-selective traps, including the Veto Farmer trap, yellow trap that you see on the far left. Non-selective trapping means that the trap doesn't differentiate between Asian hornets and other insects. They cause great concern to the ecologists due to the potential effect on insect biodiversity, killing lots of useful insects. A very concerned French Natural History Museum, the MNHN, published this photograph which showed 1,000 insects caught in a trap, mostly flies, for only 3 Asian hornet queens caught, if in fact the third one there is not actually a worker. 94% of the bycatch was flies. This was a drowning trap with no escape holes. But I've always had a doubt about this photograph because there are just too many European hornets. It was out far too late in the season. The photograph was thoroughly misleading. The Asian hornet queens would, by the time that photograph had been taken and the trap emptied, have been confined to their nests. They wouldn't be flying around to go into the trap. Furthermore, the MNHN was keeping something to themselves, a dark secret. It was sitting on the data from a study in which it had been involved, the results of which were only published 10 years later in 2021. The result of that study was to change everything. It had found that an average Asian hornet nest consumes 11 kilograms of insect in a season, equating, the study said, to over 96,000 honeybee-sized insects, or many more smaller ones. Now, the MNHN's contention was that spring traps are only 1% efficient. So only 1 in 100 will be an Asian hornet. And if we accept their unproven contention that you have to kill 10 foundress queens to stop 1 main nest, the arithmetic's simple. 1 in 10 times 1 in 100, so that's 1,000 bycatch insects to stop 1 nest. Even then, sacrifice 1,000 insects as bycatch to save 95,000 insects in the first year alone, and stop a main nest that will produce more nests in the following years. They had just proved that even non-selective trapping can be the lesser of 2 evils. But you have to have enough hornets in your area to be sure that trapping is at least 1%. Hence the new French plan's decision to only start spring trapping when you get 1 to 3 hornets in front of the hive. That's about the only thing in their plan that does make sense. Now this question about, are selective traps too selective? The scientists on the steering group of the French New Plan insisted that only these 3 very selective traps are used, very expensive selective traps. The Japanese trap, the Bee Vital Korean wing trap, and the Niobe yellow trap. These are all in range 35 to 50 euros each, and to do spring trapping, the beekeeper following the trapping protocol around their apiary is going to need about 10 of these. The Belgians came up with a much more sensible idea, a much cheaper cone trap that fits on a honey or jam jar for only 60 cents each. But it's got to be a bulk order of 5,000, good for local authorities and good for associations to buy. When you take into account that Brittany are planning to buy 12,000 of those €50 Korean wing traps by the end of this year, £600,000, euros rather, you can tell the difference there. I would have thought the bulk order for the Belgian thing would be a much better idea. But it's not just a case of using a selective trap for a set period of time. It's not just how many you catch, it's how many you don't catch. I showed you a photograph of 4 citizens showing off their traps, and I should say that in a number of trials, no one's established any real difference in the efficiency of the baits, commercial or the French homemade cocktail. Dr. Sandra Rogers at the University of Vigo used 3 of those traps when she did her field trials with beekeepers in Galicia. She found that the dome traps on the left were twice as effective in catching hornets as the Vito Farmer trap in the middle, and 12 times more efficient compared with the artisan trap on the right. So what was the significant difference between them? The answer lies in the size of the trap's opening. INRA did a field test of traps. This would be back in 2007 to 10. And they'd already found that a large funnel entrance caught far more Vespa velutina than the narrow funnel entrance. The problem was that the hornets could escape the trap too easily with the big funnel opening, a problem they rather ingeniously but impractically solved using talcum powder to stop the hornets climbing up to get out. As you can see, the funnels were perforated, so diffusion of odour wasn't a factor. A lot of the selective traps on the market go for a very narrow opening, typically 8mm. But in Belgian laboratory tests with an 8mm entrance, even though a hornet queen could go through the hole, over a third of the hornets didn't go in. So in a compromise, the Belgians have gone for 8.4mm. But that's under artificial test conditions. I'm going to suggest fewer Asian hornets would enter the trap if there were other food sources around. There are lots of traps out there, but they do not always say what the size opening is that they're using. So if you buy a trap, check the opening, and if it's 8mm, buy an 8.5mm drill. Actually, I'd go for a 9mm drill and widen the hole. And with these traps, there's an escape problem that INRA had identified. If you have vespids left in a trap, mine are apishields, even with a narrow entrance cone, you'll go there one day, it'll be crammed to bursting with vespids. Next morning, go in to empty it, and you'll find nobody there. They've all escaped. The fact is, a vespid left in a trap, even with a narrow entrance cone, will find a way out eventually, and when it does, it tells its mates the way out too, and then there's a mass exodus. It's the great escape. The Vespigard V-trap modification to the already expensive Korean wing trap uses a one-way metal pin that acts like a porta bee escape to stop hornets getting out. But now your €50 trap has just gone up to €60. You need to use a trap with an entrance that's modified to deal with the problem. Some are, but some are not. I said earlier that the new French plan had lost touch with reality. Well, let's see what the beekeepers are actually using. The survey asked, what traps are you using? Those traps marked in green are categorized as selective. Those in red are not selective. The more expensive traps are marked with an asterisk. You can see they're not very popular, except for the Jabber Pro and the red trap. But of course, they are large capacity traps that are also used in the apiary during peak predation. That's why they're being used. The beekeepers in Nouvelle-Aquitaine seem to be choosing traps based on functionality and cost, not selectiveness. That is causing concern amongst the bee health associations. This is a bottle trap, and under the new plans charter, they are prohibited. It's a drowning trap. This is the one that I think they're using. That might deal with the escape problem, but the rotting insects attract flies, and that was over 90% of the bycatch. And they're not the best trap to use for spring trapping. Even if you make them a non-drowning trap and put escape holes in the funnel, they're too big. They take too much bait. And in what can be in cool conditions in the spring, they're just too big for the bait's odour to escape unless the sun is really out and warms it up. But don't forget, once you reach the hornet threshold, trapping is the lesser evil, even if you are getting some bycatch. You have to catch a lot of bycatch to beat the one hornet nest equals almost 100,000 insect prey. Whatever you use, you're going to have to base your decision on what you believe is the typical density of hornets in your area. You can't wait each year to find out, because trapping comes before the predation level is known. So we'll wrap up there by just calling in at Switzerland and seeing what they've been doing. It's another country that has seen a marked increase in Asian hornet nests. The first Swiss nest was detected on its borders in 2017, but protected by a ring of the Alps. They didn't really get going until 2022. The hornet is, when I checked this last, was present in 14 of the 26 Swiss cantons. I'm not sure what the Swiss were doing in those 5 years, but they did decide that responsibility for control of the hornet falls to the canton. Nest destruction is at private expense. The policy at this stage is eradication. Beekeepers are stated by the plan as being essential to successful implementation. This is envisaged in the plan as being in the reporting and monitoring role, but that is not how it is worked out. The plan starts with a very sensible caution. Do not let yourself be drawn into actions that are at best ineffective and expensive. Now we're looking at 2 cantons. The first is Neuchâtel, the second is the canton of Vaud. Just picking out the key points, Neuchâtel. So the Swiss had 222 Asian hornet nests in 2023, 810 in 2024. This is the typical quadrupling we see whenever the hornet starts to get established. The Neuchâtel beekeepers have formally signed on to take over the role of nest reporting, educating the public, and nest location using time-consuming, they say, but effective methods. Nevertheless, most of the nests in Neuchâtel were not located before the sexuals had emerged. They say effective, but as they hadn't located them before the sexuals had emerged, in fact, at this critical stage, a waste of time. Even in this very early stage, they are appealing for help from the general population. The bigger department or canton of Vaud is the size of Cambridgeshire. You can see the number of reported nests each year. As happened in Neuchâtel, another canton where they were not prepared, the beekeepers stepped in to fill the breach, hoping that one day a state structure will be put in place to manage and lead this fight. These are beekeeper volunteers who are currently ensuring the transitions. Last year, they recruited a team of 60 beekeepers to do track and trace, but they actually only trained 3 of them to do nest destruction. At the end of 2024, they destroyed 52 primary nests and 18 secondary nests. Rather tellingly, the organisers cautioned their beekeepers that they are overwhelmed, and they too were calling for more volunteers. Even destroying 70 nests out of the 200 reported will not be enough to impact on the hornet's expansion. It's ineffective. In 2025, faced with an alarming increase in nests, authorities and beekeepers are now joining forces. New measures are being implemented to counter this year. The canton is funding the acquisition and detection of destruction equipment to the tune of 35,000 francs. That's £32,000 in English money. The FVA, which is the Vaud Beekeeping Association, is investing 30,000 francs, and some beekeeping societies have already invested a similar amount. This evening, we started in Belgium with ad hoc beekeepers setting themselves up as pest controllers, engaged in what I fear will prove to be an heroic failure. They'll never destroy enough nests to make a difference. In France, the government, the scientists and the bee health organisations all proclaim their new national plan, but it's unworkable and with no state funding. I'm not even sure that the French beekeepers will support the new plan, since two of the biggest beekeeping unions, UNAF and the SNA, walked out of Inter-API, which is their representative on the steering committee. Nest destruction in any of the three forms I have described to you tonight don't solve the problem. They cannot destroy enough nests. Beekeeper nest destruction schemes are not as simple as they might seem. Wide area, that is county-wide spring trapping, is too controversial and doesn't achieve more than the beekeeper can do in the vicinity of their apiary. In Switzerland, the Swiss beekeepers did not understand that what they committed themselves to is ineffective and expensive. It's a pity they didn't heed the warning that was given at the beginning of their own national plan. Now, it is not for me to tell individuals or associations what to do once the MBU has to retire to the sidelines or withdraw to a perimeter if they go for a containment policy. But I hope I've caused you to reflect on the reality of these different schemes. I urge you to think about what you as an individual and your association as an association is going to do when the Hornet is established, and think about it while you still have the luxury of time. Do not underestimate the scale of the task. Don't take on something unless you're equipped to do it properly and have sufficient people. If there is a vacuum when the MBU has to withdraw, don't just rush in to fill it. Okay, well, now I've put all the information on the things I've talked about tonight in my book, which was published by Northern Bee Books last April. It's on a wide load of platforms, Amazon and everything, as well as all the information you need on apiary defences. And I'm back on the BBKA speakers list for those who want to hear from me in person, preferably talking to county associations, or I'm going to be doing too many talks. So there you go. I thank you for your attention. I hope you haven't all gone to sleep. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I think I've got this Zoom room in my house for another 20 minutes before my wife has to take it over for a business call. So I'll unshare my screen if I can work out how to stop it. Oh, there you go.
I've done that one.
Well done.
You've actually got about 8 minutes before I need to leave the house. So we've got a few questions. There's been some conversation going on in the chat with Jackie Orcott from Dover. Someone does ask the very simple question: if beekeeper destruction teams become a reality, will training be available? And I think I can answer that is yes. We wouldn't want beekeepers just randomly going and doing things. And I think Andrew will agree, all the chemicals that get used need to be by licensed people, don't they?
Yes, I do.
Which leads on to David's question: would the explosive injection of diatomous earth by carbon dioxide be better than insecticide?
Well, I know it's being investigated by the French and particularly by the Belgians, and there is a movement that says it's better than insecticide. I've got to say that's the limit of my knowledge on that one. As far as I'm concerned, I just want to see a dead Asian hornet nest. How you do it, I think, is a matter for a completely separate debate, and I'm really not qualified to talk on that.
Thank you. Is there clear indication of the various indications of measurable impact in France in areas where Asian hornet has been fully established beyond control? Is it the impact that will drive the desire to control? So what's changed their minds possibly? I think that's
Well, what changed their mind, Diana, was the Diane, sorry, was the huge surge in 2022. And that meant that areas of the country, particularly in the east and the northeast of France, that hadn't really suffered very much from the Asian hornet, it was more a nuisance, suddenly became a real problem to beekeepers. Everybody became very concerned, particularly about the number of stings, the risk to human health. It all hit the headlines, and that's what caused, first of all, a vote in the French Senate to control the hornet. Very important to note there, by the way, that all the money that was put in there by the senators was quietly eased out in the committee stage, and when it went through the National Assembly, it was nodded through. There was a discussion about this. I know they weren't very happy about it, but they decided for speed, the only thing to do was to use the formal nodding through process, and so that money's never gone back in again. But I think you're talking about impact there. There's been an impact everywhere. And I think a growing realization in France, probably started by the Spanish and people like Roger Snosser pointing out the effect of the Asian hornet on the whole pollination process. So people are putting a lot of effort into assessing the costs. No doubt there is a lot of cost attached to it. The simple fact is, in France, the French state is bankrupt. Its debt is in trillions of euros, and they can't afford to do anything. So just in case anybody's thinking this way, that all we can say to the government, look how much it's going to cost if the Asian hornet gets in here and gets established. I have an idea that Rachel Reeves has probably got a higher priority list at the moment. Sorry.
Thank you. There are two examples of where nest numbers have been controlled, Guernsey and Malaga. What have they done that's so special? Do you know?
I suspect that Guernsey is just that little bit further away from Manche, and so has not had the insects flying over in the same way that Manche has. It's far enough not to be a flyable distance, and I can't remember what the ferry route is now, but it always used to be. It went to Jersey, and far less traffic actually went up to Guernsey. As far as Malaga's concerned, we often talk about the Balearics, if I think you call it, actually managed to get rid of the hornet when it first came in. It's back again. So it's simply been reinvaded. This is always the problem with the Asian hornet. The relief has been, well, it's been a few years, but it's been temporary.
And my own question is, how long do you think Asian hornets have been in Cork?
Oh, I've no idea.
Three nests. That strikes me as quite shocking.
I think you have to remember that the Asian hornet gets itself into an area using two mechanisms. One is it hitchhikes in, which is where it first gets there. The hitchhiking hornet is a very vulnerable insect, and its success rate in surviving is actually very low indeed. Where the Asian hornet wins is where it has a constant refreshment of reinforcements coming over all the time. And that's what's happening now in the southeast of England. We had a whole load of different departments in France that were invaded early on. I'm thinking particularly of, say, the Côte d'Or, which had, that was invaded in 2009. By 2013, that small invasion caused hitchhiking, probably up the canal system, had disappeared, came back again in 2017 and really got a grip. There are all sorts of examples there. It was in northern France and Belgium, probably as early as 2011. It really hasn't made any, or hadn't made any impact. And then suddenly it took off from about 2021, the numbers built until this explosion in 22. So hitchhiking hornets, it all depends whether they get, well, they don't get reinforcements, but it all depends if you get more following. That's a matter of chance. I'm quite relaxed about the one in Runcorn and the one in Yorkshire. and probably the ones in Cork, the hitchhikers. But the ones down in Kent, whatever is being got rid of by the MBU is being reinforced each year, just as Jersey is being reinforced each year coming over from Monch.
Right, thank you. This is going to be the last question, I'm afraid, tonight.
Okay.
Is there any research ongoing to control breeding, i.e. contraceptives for Asian hornets?
I don't know about contraceptives. I know that there are programs at the moment investigating using various bacteria. I have detailed in the book a load of different ideas that the French scientists have come up with. I would urge caution because there was an awful lot of programs and papers written early on promising different solutions to the Asian hornet. None of them have really borne fruition. Even the pheromone traps that we thought might offer some relief have not actually translated properly into something you can use on the ground. It's proving a lot more difficult than they thought, partly because they don't know where the mating between male and female sexuals actually takes place. So they don't know where to put the traps. I don't hold out an awful lot of hope, but then something may suddenly change. I mean, if I was running a scientific program, there is one program I really think we ought to be paying for, getting people to look at it, and that's a Trojan bait. That's what we really need, because that would be we would have a viable way of catching sufficient hornets to make a substantial difference there.
Right. Thank you so much for this evening. Your talk was absolutely fascinating, seeing what's been going on in Europe and what we can learn from that. On behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for the time you put into this. It is really valuable for us. So
okay, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for listening.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
How do I leave? There we go.